What is up, everybody? Dusty here, back with a Game of Thrones mod for Crusader Kings 3. Now, this fantastic mod has gotten an update since the last time I featured it here on the channel, which added in dragons as well as a few more starting dates so they can experience them in all of their glory. And considering how badly House of the Dragon blueballed viewers with the ending of Season 2, I thought it was the perfect time to put my own spin on things. So usually for these games, I prefer to play as my own custom character and slowly build up my family's fortunes and legacy, but considering the fact I'd actually like to showcase some of the mod's newer features without having to dump like 40 hours into the game first, I decided to go with good old Daemon Targaryen instead.
Wonderful.
When the game kicks off, Viserys sits upon the Iron Throne, supported by his new wife Alicent. Rhaenyra is his unchallenged heir, and Daemon has just begun his invasion of the Stepstones, primarily as an excuse to get away from his bronze bitch of a wife. And the early parts of my campaign actually mirrored the events of the book and the show rather closely. Aided by the sea snake Corlys Velaryon, Daemon quickly managed to bring the Stepstones under his thumb and claim the islands in the name of House Targaryen. He then returned to the Red Keep to bend the knee and pay homage to his brother, who asked Daemon to name his reward. Daemon requested to be named as his brother's heir in the Lord of Dragonstone, which is understandably shot down, but I mean, you can't blame a guy for trying. But when Viserys also turned down Daemon's second, apparently more reasonable demand to be engaged to his 10-year-old niece, Daemon was far less understanding. Burn them all! But Daemon somehow suppressed the urge to turn King's Landing into a smoking pile of rubble, and instead just renounced his fealty to his brother and fled back to the Stepstones to rule over them in his own right. As soon as he was back home, he directly appealed to the Grand Maester for a divorce, who was more than happy to grant it, and the fact that he was no longer being dragged down by the old proverbial ball and chain did make it easier to accept Viserys' eventual apology. The dissolution of his marriage was also incredibly politically advantageous, as a few months later he received an invitation to Driftmark from his old ally the Sea Snake, and wins the right to marry his daughter Laena after killing her fiancé in a duel, and a few years later the couple would celebrate the birth of their twin daughters, Rhaena and Baela. However, there were already a few key divergences from the proper timeline by this point. For instance, instead of slumming in Essos as glorified beggars, Daemon and Laena would instead arrive as conquerors, using their pair of ferocious dragons to quickly capture the city of Tyrosh, which Daemon named as the capital of his young kingdom, as well as the surrounding areas. Back over in King's Landing, when Alicent gave birth to Aegon, Viserys had no qualms about pushing Rhaenyra to the side, immediately naming his new son as his heir. And almost flying under the radar was that Daemon ended up developing a true bromance with his father-in-law. In fact, the two of them ended up becoming so close that following the death of the Sea Snake, Daemon wound up bonding with his brother-in-law, who was not married to Rhaenyra in this timeline and was free from all the headaches that accompanied being a member of the royal family. There was some slight concern as Daemon and Laena's little brood kicked off with 3 delightful daughters, which did create a minor controversy, but when the couple welcomed a second pair of twins, there was extra cause for celebration, as one of them was indeed the male heir that Daemon had been holding out for. And naturally, all of these well-bred offspring would lead to a number of politically motivated marriage arrangements to ensure key alliances, as Daemon locked up a betrothal between his heir and one of Rhaenyra's daughters, and promised to marry off one of his own to a Dornish prince. Daemon would also have an encounter with a red priest who introduced him to a strange new foreign god known as the Lord of Light. And considering that the worship of fire is a pretty big component of their whole religion, it obviously appealed to someone who considered themselves to be the blood of the dragon, and Daemon quickly ended up being such a devoted follower that he soon went so far as to modify the iconic banner of House Targaryen for his own personal arms, which he would later officially adopt for his branch of the family. While Daemon kept tabs on the news out of Westeros, his main concern over the next few years was expanding his sphere of influence in Essos, although when he wasn't leading his men out on the front lines, he could usually be found on top of one of his wives as his family grew alongside his territorial holdings.
My cock rages on! My cock rages on!
And while his subjects might have considered him to be a godlike, majestic monarch, Daemon soon discovered that this did little to impress his oldest daughters, who were now teenagers, and rebuffed his attempts to find common ground with them at every turn. Then again, given the man's previous attempts to cope with his niece, I'd be worried too.
I'm in danger!
During this period, he'd also seek out less traditional ways to increase his standing. See, Daemon had been hoping that Vhagar would provide him and Laena with dragon eggs to pass along to some of their kids, but the old Dracaena hadn't exactly been forthcoming, so he funded a small expedition to Old Valyria, which resulted with the retrieval of a magnificent rose-colored dragon egg, which Daemon promptly awarded to his heir, who eventually managed to hatch it. By 132 AC, Daemon's young kingdom was the largest of all of its neighbors, and while his army couldn't come close to matching the full might of his brothers, the wealth that was being generated in its cities would have made even the most highborn Westerosi lord's eyes water. And honestly, Daemon probably would have been content with all this, but a year later his brother Viserys suddenly died from a minor illness. And while Daemon did in fact grieve for his brother, he also couldn't help but notice that an unexpected unexpected opportunity had arisen, as the realm was thrust into a large-scale civil war when Aemon usurped the throne from his older brother Aegon. Now for his part, Daemon just watched to see how the situation played out, as he was currently occupied with a scheme of his own.
Someone help!
Shut up, you old pig!
This turned out to be quite a prudent move, as Aemon's rebellion ended up being a bit of a wet fart, as it only took Aegon and his loyalists about a year to reclaim the Iron Throne, and the king showed no mercy to his little brother, who he swiftly put to death. However, it seemed the rebellion convinced the rest of the lords that the Targaryens' grip over Westeros wasn't as secure as it had been under Viserys, and a group of Valyrian supporters rose up to support Laenor's claim for Dragonstone. Aegon soon discovered that most of the houses who'd aided him during Aemon's rebellion weren't nearly as concerned over the fate of House Targaryen's ancestral home, and declared they'd remain neutral during this conflict, which provided the perfect opportunity for our hero to reclaim his birthright. The fact that the Westeros branch of the Targaryens now found themselves engaged in two wars obviously put them at a huge disadvantage, as Daemon and his allies were able to make their initial push into the Crown Lands without any opposition. Eventually, though, Aegon would set his sights on his uncle, and the two armies would finally clash.
What have I done?
Aegon and his dragon were slain by Queen Laena and Vhagar, and his 5-year-old daughter Lethene was forced to abruptly ascend to the throne, so it became pretty apparent to everybody that Daemon's eventual victory was only a formality. There was little time to celebrate, though, as during the closing stages of the war, pirates had launched one of their regular invasions of the Stepstones, and Daemon still wasn't willing to let go of those worthless little rocks, and even when that was taken care of, Aegon's widow Helena still had the audacity to fashion her daughter as the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. And obviously, this was an insult that Daemon wasn't gonna take lying down.
Dumb bitch.
But even when that loose end had been wrapped up, it still wasn't the end of all the headaches, as being the unquestioned and rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms also meant that Daemon inherited the war for Laenor's claim on Dragonstone, although neither side really had their hearts in it by this point, so after winning a few battles, Daemon issued the rebels some very generous peace terms, which were happily accepted. And now that Daemon had fully established his control over Westeros, it was time to deal with the banalities of peacetime, which included making preparations for his coronation, appointing new members to his Kingsguard, and dealing with POWs. If you couldn't afford a ransom, you were given the option to embrace the Lord of Light as the one true god. Those who accepted were released without incident, while those who refused to convert would get the opportunity to see how well the Seven would protect them up on the wall. However, a few of the prisoners were impatient with the proceedings and cut to the front of the line by demanding trial by combat, which did provide the occasional entertainment. But a dark cloud soon began to form over King's Landing, as rumors began to circulate that Daemon had a sudden and dramatic decline in health, and many people had begun to suspect that Daemon would never actually be able to wear the crown that he'd spent his whole life fighting for. But stubborn as always, Daemon proved them all wrong and was officially named the true king of Westeros in front of all the lords of the Seven Kingdoms. As could be expected for an old man in ill health, his last few years weren't exactly the most eventful, as his days of conquest had long since passed. When he wasn't dealing with the administration of the realm, he usually occupied himself with a bottle to self-medicate, although one bright spot during this period is that it became obvious that Rhaenyra didn't resent her uncle for usurping her brother's throne, and the two actually became closer than ever before. But sadly, the two wouldn't get much time to develop their newfound friendship, as Daemon soon quietly passed away at the age of 64. While the official reports attributed it to his worsening alcoholism, there were those who believed that since he'd finally accomplished his life's goal, that the old warrior simply no longer had a reason to live. Either way, his son Daemon II inherited the Iron Throne, a fully stocked treasury, and more dragons at House Targaryen's command than ever before. However, given the contentious nature in which his branch of the family had seized the throne, along with their devotion to the Lord of Light, whether or not the peace that the realm now enjoyed would actually last was anybody's guess. Hey again everybody, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you didn't, then I have no clue why you're still hanging around at this point, like what are you doing? But if you did enjoy it, then why not leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel to be kept up to date with all my latest content. Or don't let me tell you how to live your life. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, I'm out.